what you said times 2. Oh, and later.
Hi everyone, my name is Corbin, he and pronouns. I'm a member of Sunset Park for Liberated Futures, or SPLF, or Split, or whichever you prefer. We started in 2014, I believe, as a cop watch group, cop watch team. I was part of the Cop Watch Alliance, and then as of 2017, we began to, we noticed the limitations of that model of doing cop watching and wanted to do more community organizing, particularly around gentrification, meaning that there was the industry city rezoning that was underway. So yeah, we are a humble collective of folks in Sunset Park of long-time, lifetime, and residents, and we're super happy to be here. We admire the work of a lot of the groups here, the individuals here, and so just like to have this conversation. I hope it's the first of many.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Shearer. I am part of Crash, which is a student group at Hunter, organizing meetings for engineering in the future and department at Hunter College. But we also support a lot of other campaigns within the community, mainly the 7-year strike campaign to get adjuncts for wage. And I also recently started organizing the Gentrification project, which is a gentrification group and community setting against racism.
Hi, I'm Sam Stein. I use he, him pronouns. I wrote the book, and I'm just really thankful to the organizers for putting this together. I'm thankful you all for being here. I'm excited that people want to use the ideas in the book for organizing. I'm going to take a back seat tonight. I'm here and can talk, but really this is about folks deciding how they want to use work and put it out.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So I think we'll just start, since I gave that sort of long spiel about being to the left of nonprofits and politicians. Maybe one of the questions we could start with is, what would a radical strategy that's based on direct action look like to, in this sort of context where a lot of our housing law comes from Albany? So what does it look like to fight locally in a direct action-based strategy against these struggles?
Thank you. Is that hogging the mic so
a few days ago, I was approached by a canvasser for a pretty well-known nonprofit in New York City. Doesn't matter which one it was, and they were telling me that talking about housing issues and we do, and they were saying we're more we engage people in direct action, like we're going up to Albany to do a die-in, and so I think that question of direct, what are we talking about when we use direct action is an important one. I think for the conversations that we had in our reading groups was more looking at the reference of actually expropriating housing, expropriating land as a way that communities are actually taking what they need as opposed to a die-in to influence politicians somehow. And so I just want to put that in there, I think it's on us as organizers who are working outside of the nonprofits to really be clear about what we're talking about when we talk about direct action and call it out when we see nonprofits kind of using the terminology of direct action, but it's not really doesn't really have much substance to it.
I guess just want to reiterate, that's not anything I would consider direct action. Direct action has to in some way fundamentally challenge the basic social relation that's at hand, whether it's with withholding rent, like rent strike could be a form of direct action, or, you know, coming and actually like blocking a space and preventing it from being evicted or something of that nature, like directly intervening in a way that is intolerable in some way to capital real estate. So, yeah, I mean, which is hard to do, it's hard to pull off, and it's hard to be consistent about that. But yeah, I mean, and not just maybe like calling it out, but like actually doing those kinds of actions and holding them up as like an example of the kinds of things that have to be done.
A few things came to mind when you said that, like, so direct action strategies, and then this thing about the laws in Albany. I think that there's two ideas that I've been sort of in my mind rallying behind, and I don't know how they make sense in terms of like practicality, but you know, fuck the Euler process. I think we need to get that like into the zeitgeist somehow, and this thing about this thing about laws being passed in Albany is a power play. You know what I'm saying? That way, it's not us, it's them. You know. I think if we can agitate for the way that these things are decided to be removed from Albany, so that we can hold city folks accountable for what happens here, that's something to really try to agitate for, in my opinion. You know, Take Back the Bronx right now is organizing a project-based Section 8 building, and it's fucking hard. And we don't really know what the hell we're doing, so we're kind of like learning as we go along, you know. And we hooked up with this National Association of HUD tenants, which is like this feels like a tenant union that has like about 127 project-based Section 8 buildings nationally. So they got a little bit of clout, and like their idea of direct action is also, we're gonna go to Albany, and they have like relationships, like through them we were able to jump on a call with the regional director of HUD and put some pressure that way. But it's very much through the template that's already laid out. So I think, you know, shifting culture is huge for me. Like I feel like shift the culture on the Euler, shift the culture on where laws get passed, and shift this culture of like going through these channels that the nonprofits are just so used to, where they get a little bit of crumbs here and there for buildings here not supposed to be good enough, but we're still operating within the same structure.
So just a small thing that I was thinking about, right, is a way that like us building a direct action-based movement in the neighborhoods affects how the legal and political level in Albany goes down, right? So like right now there's, on the one hand, there's the Albany front with the universal rent control laws, right? And a whole bunch of debate going on about which of those basket of 9 laws they're gonna pass in Albany, correct? And for us in the Bronx, as we're facing down like a rezoning and we're dealing with sort of the local kind of development machine, it means we're coming up against a pretty entrenched political machine. Like the Bronx political machine, I don't know enough about the other boroughs really, because we're just learning as we go. But the Bronx political machine, as I understand it, is at like the height of its political power right now. Right? You got Salamanca on land use in city council, you have Ruben Diaz up like behind the curtain as borough president, you know, and you have Carl Heastie running shit in the state assembly, right? And they're all Bronx-based machine politicians. So us fighting locally against a little rezoning, you know, we're small, we don't have that much power, you know, we're trying to build it, but if we can punch above our weight and we start to bring some scrutiny and some pressure on the Bronx political machine, even cause it to weaken or fracture, that means Carl Heastie in Albany won't be able to hold kind of the right wing of the political debate, right? Because at least the last thing I read was there's a whole bunch of debate about which parts of universal rent control to pass, and Carl Heastie's like, I don't want to do the one that's put forward by the Democratic Socialists, I don't want to do the one that might bring more rents under, you know, he wants to make sure that existing rent control laws are like protected, but he doesn't want to expand them too much. But so if we can weaken those machines locally by building some sort of direct action-based movement that can operate independently of those politicians, we also simultaneously open up the possibility for the reform. We just don't wind up doing it by becoming the lapdogs of the politicians that pass that on our behalf.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to kind of say that that's part of what we've done with the different groups, which is to think of the possibility, like this analysis is deep and it's important. And I think that it avoids the pitfalls of movements need to be cashed in and co-opted. And I think that it understands a horizon that's much deeper than any specific reform, but doesn't discard it. And I think that's important. Now, what we've offered in Decolonize This Place, meaning all of us, is just another kind of name or space for us to think of direct action as escalatory and to think of a people's plan that is a horizon. Because I think that in order to move people, you need to have an imagination of what's possible. And that, when we thought about this in terms of NYC Not For Sale, which was just picking up on what all the organizers were doing in the 5 boroughs already, which is just like Ridgewood not for sale, Bronx not for sale, all of these things. So you have a people's plan, you have a direct action, you understand that it puts pressure, you're not getting involved in local politics, but you know that you need to unsettle these people. And in the process, what you are producing is a different understanding of what's possible. And I think that's what we're positioning for a moment to come, right? Where it's just like, no, we can take over the lots, we can take over the buildings, we can see those churches that aren't being used, we can have different relationships that build the kind of possibility that we have that can unsettle, that also understands what I think Sam Stein's point, one of the points in the book, is just like they tell us a lot of stories in the part of rezoning and development and jobs and possibilities and affordable housing, but they never end up for us. So, and this is what divides us, right? There are many things that divide us. But that particular one, when the moment counts, I think direct action can be a difference. I think a horizon can be a different language. And I think these kind of things are an expansion of what's possible.
I was wondering if somebody could maybe break down a little bit more this question of the Euler process and these sort of participatory mechanisms, and what kind of challenges that they pose to our struggles, maybe for folks that are not familiar with this.
Sounds like a Sam job. I feel like I have to give you my jacket. Because I'm
sure. So Euler is uniform and used to review procedure, process, which is part of the New York City Charter and is the process that the city goes through for any number of different kinds of land use changes. Definitely a rezoning, which is when the city changes the rules about what can be built where. Also alienation of public lands. It's great language that they use. It's perfectly Marxist. It's their word. So when they're going through these different kinds of land use changes, they go through this process. There's a long pre-Euler process where often a lot of the negotiations happen, which is largely obscure to the public. Then a public process starts where people are encouraged to speak out at their community board. Community board being the most local form of government in New York City. This takes a while, and then the community board votes, and their vote is purely advisory. So they can vote no, and it can be yes, they can vote yes, and it can be no. Next up is the borough president. So we're going sort of up in geographical scale. The borough president similarly is advisory, but because they're elected rather than appointed, they tend to have a little more clout, and sometimes they act as the negotiator before the plan goes to the next phase, City Planning Commission. City Planning Commission is appointed mostly by the mayor, and at the moment, I believe everybody on the Planning Commission is now or has a history of working in the real estate industry. The best one is a nonprofit developer, still a developer. They are the first one that has a formal say. They can veto a project, they can pass a project, moves forward to the city council. City council should be a democratic vote of 52, is that right? Council members. Almost always the person who represents the place where the action is taken, their vote becomes everybody's vote. Except for a couple rebel politicians, the barons, other people who don't vote along with them. Everybody votes along in the hope that when it's their turn, everyone will do the same. So you're kind of like paying the favor forward. So this democratic process enlists a lot of public participation, but then pretty much just the mayor's appointees and in particular city council members are the key decision makers, and usually they've decided the parameter of the deal far beforehand. When the city initiates a rezoning, it almost always goes through. There's a couple examples when it didn't. Under Bloomberg, there was something like 122 city-initiated rezonings, 121 of them passed. So this is the process that we have for reviewing land use changes, which really sets up the entire dynamic for what gets built in the city.
I just think that this is like also what was mentioned in the book about how these processes are like over-encouraged, and just an example of it is like the plan to build for the jails has been going through the process, and it's the mayor's plan is like very clearly like not gonna the ULUR process is very much just a formality for the people to feel like, you know, we can go to these community boards and raise our opinions, and like that's us doing our job in trying to stop these jails from being built, but in the end, like the ULUR process is gonna like pass, like there's not gonna be any chance for community organizers to do things that stop the jails from being built. So I just think that's an example of how these processes are very clearly rigged from the beginning.
So yeah, about like this ULURP thing, something that like Take Back the Bronx has talked about or has tried to point out is that you can't say no. Like if you don't agree, you can't say no. And so some of the issues that we've had, like we're going through the Southern Boulevard rezoning right now, which they keep saying no, but it is a rezoning, right? Actually, have they already officially announced it as a rezoning?
Plan drops in the fall, probably.
Yeah.
So they're doing the listening sessions.
So we keep bumping up against these listening sessions, and what we come across a lot is mostly seniors who show up to these things and they eat the donuts and drink the coffee, and they came to learn and they came to participate in a democratic process, and you end up kind of bumping up against people in the neighborhood who believe their council people, their community boards are like here to do a thing. And so like the challenge I think is how do you, like, you know, while person continuing talking, Sam was talking, I'm like whispering to Elliot, like maybe it's about having a conversation, or like maybe it's about explaining the ULURP process when we disrupt, when we do these speak outs, and really hitting the nail on the head, or like driving the point home that you don't have a choice. This is like a moving conveyor belt. No matter how you feel about it, you can't say no. They're gonna do whatever they do anyway. So I'm thinking, you know, maybe that's the point that needs to be made, even though like for us in the Bronx, we're not even near a ULURP conversation yet. We're like officially, but I think that if people know that, you know, I mean, you would think that they know, because after Jerome Avenue, after East Harlem, and the way that people responded to those rezonings, that you can't say no. I think that if we can just put it on the table that this process will happen, no matter what your input is, then maybe we can start to shift this. Maybe there might be like, hold up, some concern, and not just like, excuse me, the officials are talking and you're disrupting, you're being rude, and so like navigating that shit is a little difficult, I think, you know.
One interesting recent development with regards to that in Sunset Park was the ULIP for Industry City was supposed to start last month, and then bizarrely, our council member posted on Instagram a quote from Sam's book.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, shout out to the staff that put it in Chaka's hands. I don't know, but so he posted a quote from the intro to the book, the one about like, what is it? It's like if a city is an investment strategy, then our plan is wealth management. So and so we started like, okay, like what's going on? And then shortly after, he made a statement saying that the ULIP process is insufficient for evaluating like the community's input, this, that, and the other. And then there was this back and forth. He got Industry City was like, and so he asked Industry City to like to pause on the submission for the ULIP. They were like, no, we're not going to do that. Interestingly enough, in their letters, they were like, the city just lost out on 25,000 jobs with Amazon. You're not going to do this again. Da, da, da. Then Carlos goes to Albany, and he goes to politicians in DC to put pressure again to like for Industry City to delay the ULIP process from starting and for a new participatory process to be developed. So this is super interesting. It may or may not be useful to other folks in the city to reference, like, you know, we have a city council member saying that ULIP is insufficient for evaluating the impact and the community's voice. Our concern is that it's going to be replaced with another open but rigged process, but I feel like it does give an opening for us to like get ahead of it and demand like this is the process we want. Or, like we're not gonna participate in another open but rigged like bullshit like theater. You know what I'm saying? So I just wanted, I don't know if folks are aware of that, but I feel like it's a new terrain with regards to challenging
I think like poking up, like finding where the holes are in the ULIP process and starting to like really pick at the scab of that shit is like a good time. You know?
Great metaphor.
Yeah.
Just a thought I have is like I think most people do know that ULIP is bullshit, and the sense of fatalism about it is what allows their participation in the thing, right? So because every third person that goes to any one of the public hearings gets up, there's a long line of speakers, right? And they're like, you can't talk until you do your 3 minutes and whatever. And somebody gets up and he's like, it's all bullshit. This thing is rigged. They're going to do whatever they want anyway. And just throws down his thing and walks out the door, right? Which is pretty much what everybody kind of feels, you know? So when we're out flyering outside the Department of City Planning listening sessions, we're flyering and whenever I say that message, it's like, half the people going in and like 90% of the people under 30 going in, many of whom are nonprofit staffers who have to show up with their youth group or something, they're like whispering and being like, yo, this is really bullshit. Thank you guys for being here. Please come inside and fuck it up as well. Like, I wish I could stand out here with my group of youth, but I can't because it's my job, you know? So I think there's a sense that there's like a shared sense that the thing is bullshit, but also a fatalism that nothing can be done, and therefore a very limited buy-in. I'm going to show up and give back some feedback in hopes that maybe it'll lessen the damage. Mm-hmm. Right? That's kind of the feeling. So I think we'll be lowballing popular consciousness and where everybody is at if we're trying to convince people what they already know. So I think we got to come with something else. We can't stop it this way, but we can stop it this way. You know, that's our challenge. What do we bring to people to say we can stop this process from happening and pull together something that has more popular legitimacy? But probably the first step is, can we imagine getting to a point where instead of everybody showing up to the fake meetings and going in and feeling disempowered by the time they leave, there's a popular refusal of those meetings, you know? People, until it's like a picket line, don't go in, right? Or a popular forum where a different decision is made. I'm not sure, I don't know what that would look like. But a different expression of popular will.
So, yeah, I just want to say that given what I'm hearing, I just want to kind of add more and just like expand, contrast like what is possible and what's necessary. So if we heard, it's like we're in a different moment. It's not the 70s, right? We're in a different moment. That's one focus that we can take at this time. Another one is power. And the thing is about power is that it behaves the same way, and it's a form of domination or solidarity or, whatever it is, empowerment within, empowerment with others, that solidarity, domination or oppression. Thinking about that, then the moment isn't that different. It's just named different things. And law in that context isn't very different. It's just procedural. It's what gives legitimacy to how we get fucked. And if we think of it that way, then it's important to engage in these moments as a way to develop consciousness. But I think in thinking about consciousness, people have different interests. That's what neoliberalism produces in us. And to think that we have the same interests because we're being displaced at different moments in time, or we've been displaced before, or we've long been displaced, or we've been enslaved, is to kind of miss the moment that we're in, which is how do we build power together? And so the part of, this is an addition to everything that's been said. It's not a negation. It's just to add on. I think that one of the things about this moment is like, where's Cooperation Jackson in this conversation? I don't know how to place it. Where's Crystal House in this conversation? I think when we talk about horizons, at the end of the day, we're talking about material interests of how are we living, of what are the things that we're holding on to while trying to hold on to other things. And I think that this is where race comes in, and this is where privileges come in, and this is how do we engage in those things materially as we deal with the city, as we try to put pressure in Albany, recognizing that they've consistently screwed us over, and borough per borough, neighborhood per neighborhood, we haven't been able to win. And that part of what we need to do, and I don't know how to do it, is how to frame it in broader ways to create a game in which we can win. And it's not just about knowing. And it's not just about consciousness. There's something about power that, as a settler colonial project, has consistently pitted us against each other, always with like, we need to live. And that usually justifies other things to happen, including me being a gentrifier. And then I think that owning these identities around it is not to produce guilt, but is to generate action.
Okay, so we have like 10 minutes left on the panel part. So I just wanted to kind of collapse a couple of the concerns and questions that we've brainstormed in preparing for this panel, because it's kind of coming up a little bit. So two directions you can go in, if you like. One is how to build solidarity. So, we're talking about how capital, one of the strategies of capital is to divide people and force people to sort of engage as an individual or as a small subgroup of people rather than a collective. And so how do we build solidarity around housing with people who might identify as students or immigrant groups or under certain identity groupings or as NYC tenants versus homeowners, all of this stuff. So how do we build solidarity? And then secondly, we could also dive in a little bit more into this question about cooperations and cooperatives and community land trusts, because this is sort of a hot button issue where people are saying that that's sort of the model that we need to fall back on. So I'm wondering what people think about those models, if people have friendly critiques or positives, or if people want to talk about it a little bit. So solidarity, cooperative models. 10 minutes.
That's an existential question.
I'll say something.
Cool.
I mean, there are a lot of things that could be said, but I think that one thing that you have to do with this is, like, draw some class lines. I mean, when you start involving property owners and things of that nature, I mean, that is no longer part of the working class, and you have to say, like, they have, to some extent, you're going to have fundamentally different interests. And all of these things have to be taken into account, trying to homogenize everyone, just say because, you live in a neighborhood, you're the same people, you have the same interests. Like, there are some fundamental differences. At the same time, there are some differences that are bridgeable. But I would say that one is a particularly strong element that in many cases cannot be bridged.
be negative, so I'm not.
Something that we talked about was the question of, I think one of the really interesting discussions during our reading group was this question of what are the different strategies towards the decommodification of land, and what are the pitfalls or the contradictions within the sort of state-owned route versus the cooperatives, community land trust route. And what are and also one thing that we talked about was if we're really talking about decommodifying land and how does even though we would all be super psyched about universal rent control, it still treats land as a commodity that can be bought and sold. And so disrupting that logic is what we were talking about, what the decommodification of land is about. It's how people have treated land prior to capitalism in another non-capitalist context. It's not something you can buy and sell, but also if the state is owning it, that creates a new landlord-tenant relationship. Community land trusts are often, it's a nonprofit that's usually given the land, either donated or they're able to buy it, and especially in New York City, just is not the philanthropic will or money available to buy the land. So what are the routes towards gaining territory and gaining land? And so those are some of the conversations we're having, and I think it'd be dope to have those conversations in the second part of it, if time allows at another event. But I just wanted to contribute that.
I won't be negative. I keep going back to maybe it's because I'm an artist and I believe in culture. I think that when it comes to building solidarity, that especially thinking through homeowners, tenants, students, which would qualify as gentrifiers a lot of times, or in the Bronx, a lot of first-time college graduates coming back home, that bourgeois aspiration within us, just all of these different interests. I think maybe can be umbrellaed in terms of solidarity under a cultural shift in understanding what Sam calls in his book seizing the means of spatial production. I think that if we could make McDonald's, I ate some McDonald's french fries on my way here, I'm not gonna lie, and apple pie. I was really hungry, but I felt guilty about it, you know what I'm saying? If we could make McDonald's gross, that's McDonald's is such a part of the American fabric. Every little kid wanted a Happy Meal. Growing up for me, I promise this is part of it. But that shit became gross in the 2K. You know what I'm saying? And we eat it and we feel guilty about it. We know it's disgusting. That was a cultural shift. If we could all collectively decide as a people that McDonald's is gross, then we can all collectively decide as a people that a landlord is an archaic idea, and that maybe property might be an archaic idea too. You wouldn't want to own. People do want to own air rights now, so we're going in the wrong direction culturally. But I think that a cultural shift will be needed in what we understand. What we understand is in the commons, and I think that unless we're able to do shit like that and really focus on that, then cooperatives are. I know so many people that are in co-ops that are miserable. You know what I'm saying? Because working together, solidarity is hard, and personalities, and we all have little miniature capitalists inside our fucking head that we don't check, and so I don't know. I'll leave it there. Y'all know what I mean. You know, unless we can change that, then it's all doomed to fail. Sorry, I got back to the negative.
No, just on that negative point, I don't think it's negative at all. I think part of the horizon that we're striving for is a horizon that isn't a one size fits all. And I think that when we're talking, for me, when I'm thinking of like homes, and homes are very different than property and houses and relationships and what we have been reduced to, and how in the reduction of who we are, everything, additional things get commodified, including who do you talk to, that's your therapist. You gotta pay for someone to listen to you who probably doesn't give a shit about you, right? That's a part of the life that we live in. And so then the question becomes, it's not so much that you want, it's not so much that you want to own stuff or you want to convince a Warren Candors of the world that there's a particular way to live, but that there needs to be a baseline for us, and then other people can choose other things. And I think that when we're talking about housing, part of it is that it's a struggle. It's not just deciding on what we want it to be. There's a war. And then the question is, how are we fighting that war? And how are we building legitimacy with people who don't know there's a war? And how do we have a horizon that is unachievable in the process, because that's the only thing power understands. It's not, if you be reasonable in your demand, you will never achieve the thing that you want. If you unsettle the whole fucking thing, then they'll be the first people to offer you. Then the question is how do we protect each other? Because we remember what happened to MOVE in '85, right? We know what Crystal House goes through. We know that anytime your resistance becomes effective, it is a challenge to the state. And the state protects property, and that's what this fucking thing is called. The book. It's actually pointing out that the function of government has become a facilitator of property, a facilitator of real estate. That in other words, the people that govern us are real estate, developers and the like. So in that kind of mode, how are we living? How are we fighting? How are we loving? And yes, direct action. But yes, direct action in an expanded sense. Yes to being active, but not just activism. Yes to organize, but we organize all the fucking time in our lives. The question is, how is every one of those acts political and actually challenges the state's role in our lives, right? And I think that that's what needs to open up in the process of this conversation, or we're not going to win and it becomes academic. And I know this because I have a student of mine at NYU who the identities they claim, Black, queer, indigenous. And they were telling me that a Black person can't gentrify. It's just not possible. That's something that we're living with. And I think part of a revolutionary struggle is to recognize the spectrum. It's a thing, it's a requirement. It is actually a responsibility. Because the days in which being a vanguard, right now, is just a performance. Honestly. Small CLT.
Give him my phone number.
I will. I actually mentioned it, and I mentioned Majora Carter in the same conversation. I'm like, boom. No, I told that I said.
I feel kind of guilty, not about McDonald's, but about always coming with these very small sort of, you get visionary comments, and I'm like, and here's what we do this thing.
That's why we love each other.
Yeah.
But on the CLT tip, so the last couple of years, right, the city council has been kind of flirting with some funding streams for community land trusts, right? I haven't kept up on all the mechanics of it. I know that one of the fronts of that in the Bronx is it's one of the ways that they're going to try to phase out scatter sites, as I understand it. Right? There's a whole bunch of scatter sites. It's been the city's way of just making the homelessness problem go away. And now those are so bad that under pressure the city's like, all right, we'll turn those into something that people love, which is a community land trust. And I guess a basket of buildings in the Bronx that were former scatter sites just got bought by the city for like 173 million. Right? So, and then those will probably be handed off to a community organization to be turned into a CLT. It's a good example of the thing, a community land trust, whatever legal entity, legal form, is just like a container for the types of relationships and struggle that get you there. And if the thing that's getting us there is the city council is, going to pay 173 million for a basket of beat up shitty buildings every time they want to create a community land trust, we won't get to widespread community control of land and housing. We'll get some very particular deals where the existing ruling class gets to like up its legitimacy and look like they're real progressive, and then hands a few cool million to landlords to allow that to happen. It would look very different, even the same legal entity, if we're creating community land trusts through people seizing buildings, through creating the legal channels where it's possible to do so, which gives us the cover for the future. So I think that's mostly what we maybe need to set aside the debate about like which exact like legal entity is the best one that solves the problem. But we could pay a little more attention to what's the type of movement that we imagine that would get us control of the land and housing. And then after that, that's the most convenient, legal route to do it. But that's my hunch. We need to open some legal windows where it's possible to take over derelict slumlord buildings and turn them into other forms of collective property. We've got to open that back up from the 70s, so we have that route again.
Are there any points that you all wanted to discuss? It's open.
I'll ask a question.
We don't have a ton of time for questions, but yes, let's do, we have 2 questions, so shout them out and then we'll.
Okay, I just want to go back to Mueller for a second and ask Gina directly, the picket line idea outside of the Mueller hearing, is that like, do you envision that to be a protest to the process until there's some modification to the process, or scrap Mueller altogether? And then the second part of the question would be, if someone could step in Chaka's shoes, who's advocating for a participatory system for Euler, what would that look like specifically?
So question about the Euler process and picketing outside of it, if that disrupts the process, or what's up with that? And then, and then Chaka,
Carlos and Chaka, the councilman in Sunset Park, who, as you mentioned, has stepped in, wants to delay the Euler process, and is advocating for a more participatory system. What would that look like?
Hi everyone, thank you. I don't know if you can hear me.
You good?
So I've got 2 questions, one of which was kind of alluded to already, but I went to a talk yesterday by an organizer of a group called MST in Brazil that does landlord rights. It was fucking fire. And they brought up the concept of counter-hegemony, which I've also been thinking about for a while, and other homies have been talking about. So I'd really just like to know what y'all thoughts are on what a global counter-hegemony may begin to. I'm sorry, I'm doing most, but I just want to hear your thoughts on materially how we can start itching at that. Maybe sharing political education thoughts or frameworks or whatever, just want to hear your thoughts. And then my second question is kind of a continuation of the first, but what does it look like for us to start to decolonize our imaginations and start to organize from the space of what we want to see versus your landlord is fucking you over, the landlord is fucking you over, I know, but now what alternative are you offering me as a grassroots organizer that this nonprofit is not offering me?
And then, so we'll just do maybe 10 minutes on this, and then there's a lot of really interesting people in the room, so we can kind of mix it up and talk to each other too, because I'm sure lots of people have lots of ideas and questions and stuff, so let's go first.
Gee, I thought they would ask you a question.
The Euler thing, right? The horizon of how do you get to sort of a popular rejection of Euler is that's the strategic goal that we've been kicking around in the Bronx. and we're still trying to find a route to it. But for sure, it means that it'd be pretty difficult to do, because if you try to, if you don't have enough of a base and the movement isn't like broad enough and the popular consciousness isn't there, then what you're going to get is a bunch of people fighting outside a ULURP meeting, right? And then the political elites or the city representatives being like, this is why you need experts to manage things, and why the people that are critiquing the ULURP are hotheads that don't want participation to happen. Right. So we have to somehow build upon the, the 8 out of 10 people that go into the hearings knowing that it's bullshit. We need to connect with that sentiment and those people. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but
I guess the question is there a vote for the ULURP process, or should it be scrapped?
Oh, right, yeah.
Is there should be
I think that's part of what would build the willingness of people to popularly reject it, right? Is the need to have an alternative. Right? Because it's a sense of fatalism that allows people to be like, I guess there's not shit else to do, so I have to go in and fill out the dots on the Department of City Planning thing. Right? So that means, can we as a movement build a broad platform which puts forward, this is how we want to do community control of land and housing in the city. I don't have that folded up in my back pocket, But a lot of those things have been floating around for years as people have been having these pissed off conversations at every protest, right? Like, we all have some idea we need to have directly elected community boards, not ones that are appointed. They need to be able to actually say no to development that goes in. Like, there needs to be significant control over resources and funding and land and how housing is used. But that's kind of the task that's before all of us, right? Like, how are we going to build that common platform across the left wing of the anti-gentrification movement in the city? And then how are we going to build the organization and movement to bring it to a head and force it?
Really quick, Gino, you and I have actually talked before about this thing about right of refusal. And I feel like, of course none of us have it in our fucking back pocket. But, we could, in the interim, be like, we want the right to say no to whatever is proposed until we're able to rebuild whatever this is supposed to look like. Just a stopgap measure, just for now. There's some breathing space.
I mean, I guess I'm just going to take it back a little bit and think about, New York State or New York City for, however many years it might seem, there actually are some, pretty good rent laws, and I happen to have a rent stabilized apartment, and, but the history of, how we even got what we have, which is not enough by any means, it comes out of major strike waves and tenant organizing and communist and socialist organizing in the 1930s and beyond. And so you have to look at the context in which these things start to gain momentum, and they come out of massive organizing and massive unrest in a lot of ways. And some of these rent control laws will get consolidated until the 40s, and you have a lot of stuff to do with World War II, the particular economic situations, and the kinds of workers that they were trying to create at the time and subsidize them. And Sam talks a little bit about that in their book. But you have to really look at it's not just sort of well, do we pick the right thing? It's really pressure and the ruling class being terrified of you to a large extent. And if there's not a broader sort of sense of they're losing control, you're not going to get anything. Or what you get is going to be easily revocable. Mm-hmm. And I just want to stress that, because that's the main thing, and it's very hard to do, but not impossible.
So the question about what would replace what would an alternative be is something that has come up a few times in Sunset and also in the conversations we've had. And one thing that has frustrated me is, when we've been in spaces as SPLF with other organizers in Sunset, and we're like, yo, fuck ULURP, let's just shut this shit down. People are like, oh, well, the alternative is what they were trying to do with Amazon, which was these backroom deals, this and that. And it's and it goes to that question about decolonizing their imaginations. It's not either ULURP or backroom deals. We can propose something even more radical. And I think as far as what that could you know, one option can be like, oh, like let's just shift the power back down to the community board. But then like a conversation that we have is like the community board itself is not a democratic institution. If half the people are appointed, there's no like mechanisms for direct accountability. So like so as far as what alternatives can be, like I'd be interested to hear what folks think. I think it's not a coincidence that like across the world, like a lot of revolutionary movements go to like the community assembly, like from Chiapas to Rojava to Spain to all types of places are looking to like popular assemblies as a mechanism for like democratizing and creating autonomy for working class people. And so those are things that we can like put out there. And I want to thank you for bringing up the MST because as Chino was talking about, like how do you force these holes in the law, like that allow you to take advantage of them in the future, like that's exactly what the MST does. It's like they, through revolutionary struggle in the 70s, they got a land reform clause in the Constitution, and that allows them to take over unused land from like plantations and create community land for landless workers. And so I think like the internationalism of this like is something we need to think about and learning from those struggles, like learning from the MST, which is like, you know, an incredibly massive organization with a really interesting methodology and a really interesting track record and an impressive track record for us to like think about how to actually organize people, how to get material gains for people, and develop consciousness amongst working class people. There are critiques of the MST we gotta be, you know, real about too, but yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of lessons there.
Any last thoughts? Nothing? Okay, so let's break into groups. Okay, how we want to do this is we'd like people to kind of mix up so that it's not, you know, organized by borough or by people that you came with. If you're shy and you want to stick with someone, that's fine. But there's a lot of really nice people in the room that will be very friendly, so feel free to spread out. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have people raise their hand by borough, and then you want to look around and you want to not be in a group with those people. That's the easiest way to think about doing it, okay? So if you're from the Bronx, raise your hand. Okay, if you're from Manhattan, raise your hand. Brooklyn?
All I gotta think about is gone.
If you're from Queens, raise your hand. Go. And then if you're from Staten Island, New Jersey, or elsewhere, raise your hand. Okay. So just spread out. We have these stations with chart paper. I'm going to come around and pass out markers.